Prince George receives this highly prestigious ceremonial title, and exactly on the polished surface, it absolutely looks exactly like one of those incredibly lovely, predictable little royal moments, right? The massive palace PR machine puts out the highly polished statement, the official photos are completely perfect, and absolutely everyone just nods along comfortably, because of course the future king gets the massive honor. But completely behind that entire, flawless performance, Queen Camilla reportedly just completely, utterly fell apart. And exactly here is the specific part that actually makes this genuinely structurally interesting, rather than just a sad family moment. She absolutely wasn't upset simply because she personally dislikes young Prince George. She absolutely wasn't bitter just because she thought a child didn't somehow deserve public recognition. She was completely shattered precisely because this specific title, this exact historic ceremonial honor, was the absolute one she had spent long years incredibly quietly, desperately believing could actually one day go entirely to her own beloved grandson, Freddie Parker Bowles. And the devastating way she actually found out that it absolutely wasn't happening, she found out entirely through the massive official press release, the exact same public announcement the rest of the world got. Absolutely no highly private, gentle conversation with her own husband beforehand, absolutely no quiet, respectful heads up entirely from the massive palace machinery she had spent decades loyally serving. She simply opened the public announcement exactly like everyone else and received the massive, undeniable message incredibly loud and clear. You can certainly wear the heavy crown, Camilla, but your specific family is absolutely still not exactly one of us. And honestly, that is exactly where this entire massive thing gets incredibly messy. Because this was absolutely never just about a single ceremonial title or one awkward, petty public snub. This was the dramatic culmination of long years of intense, quiet maneuvering, desperate whispered hopes, massive unspoken promises, and exactly two completely, fundamentally different visions about exactly who truly gets to belong completely inside this massive monarchy, absolutely all of it violently crashing into each other entirely in one brutal, definitive afternoon. Before we go any further down this rabbit hole, if you genuinely enjoy deep dives into complex royal power dynamics exactly like this, please hit subscribe to my channel. It genuinely helps the channel significantly more than you know and actively keeps you in the loop on absolutely every single update. Let's rewind the clock a bit because you genuinely simply cannot understand exactly why this specific snub hit Camilla so incredibly hard, entirely without deeply understanding exactly what she had been quietly, desperately building for years. Camilla absolutely didn't exactly walk into the massive royal family completely with a clean, easy slate, incredibly far from it. She violently walked in exactly as the highly controversial woman publicly blamed for entirely tearing apart a massive fairy tale marriage the whole world had been obsessively watching. And aggressive tabloid reporters absolutely didn't just casually stop at calling her the other woman either. They aggressively started calling her the homewrecker queen, a vicious, sticky nickname deliberately designed to completely reduce her entire complex existence entirely to one ugly, massive scandal. And that highly toxic name stubbornly followed her for significantly more than 10 grueling years. Even entirely after she finally went completely from hidden mistress to official wife, entirely from the specific woman the British public deeply despised, exactly to the woman the massive palace finally, grudgingly agreed to tolerate, that specific, ugly name absolutely never completely died. By the exact time she finally became queen consort, her legal marriage to Charles was absolutely no longer up for massive public debate. Absolutely nobody could realistically challenge her legal right to formally stand beside him anymore. But finally becoming queen absolutely didn't suddenly kill her intense, deep hunger for total acceptance. If anything at all, the massive elevation simply changed exactly what she desperately wanted fully accepted next. Absolutely not herself this specific time, her actual bloodline. Camilla has exactly 2 adult children, completely from her very first marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. Absolutely neither one legally carried a royal title. Absolutely neither one officially worked for the firm. And the massive palace apparatus had exactly one very simple, incredibly dismissive word entirely for both of them: civilians. Sure, they were genuinely loved at private Christmas gatherings and warmly welcomed entirely into private family photographs. But exactly when it came down to actually, officially counting exactly as royal? Absolutely. Categorically not. And that was absolutely not something Camilla was entirely willing to simply, quietly swallow forever. To her, Tom Parker Bowles, Laura Lopes, and their young children were her true bloodline, her absolute legacy, and she absolutely wasn't done fiercely fighting entirely for them. So, she slowly started building, incredibly quietly, incredibly carefully. Absolutely nothing flashy or dramatic enough to actively draw hostile fire. Absolutely not yet. It quietly started exactly with subtle invitations. Suddenly, her extended family slowly began showing up entirely at highly visible royal events they had absolutely never, ever been formally invited to before. Then slowly came the photographs, incredibly carefully staged and incredibly carefully timed for maximum subtle impact. Her young grandson, Freddie Parker Bowles, slowly started appearing significantly more and more, quietly sitting significantly closer entirely to the core family, slowly getting significantly closer entirely to that highly protected royal frame. And the astute people operating entirely inside Camilla's own inner circle absolutely weren't stupid. They clearly saw exactly what she was actively doing. They firmly believed she was actively, patiently grooming Freddie Parker Bowles entirely into the highly acceptable public face entirely of her family, someone charming enough, highly polished enough, and royal-looking enough to finally, permanently bridge that incredibly stubborn, massive gap entirely between her quiet world and their highly visible one. And honestly, she was incredibly clever entirely about it too. She absolutely never, ever once marched aggressively into a room and loudly demanded a formal title outright. No, that would have undeniably been entirely too obvious and easily shot down. She simply let the carefully curated photographs speak. She simply let Freddie Parker Bowles's physical, highly visible presence completely do the loud talking entirely for her, again and again and again, until the underlying message became almost completely impossible to simply miss. My family absolutely belongs here too, and they absolutely can actively serve this massive monarchy, absolutely not just quietly stand beside it. At highly private, elite dinners, she actively brought up Freddie Parker Bowles's accomplishments entirely without fail. At highly visible charity events, she meticulously made absolutely sure his name somehow organically came up exactly when the absolute right, influential people were conveniently standing nearby. She gently but firmly pushed exactly for her grandchildren's photographs entirely to prominently land completely in official palace newsletters and highly circulated Christmas cards. Tiny, almost invisible wins entirely on their own, maybe. But she relentlessly kept stacking them, exactly one entirely on top of another, year after quiet year. Then Charles finally took the massive throne, and Camilla clearly saw her massive opening. Now, she pushed significantly harder. Still incredibly quietly, of course. According to a highly placed retired palace aide, there was actually even highly serious quiet talk entirely behind closed doors exactly about formally giving Freddie Parker Bowles a minor, completely hereditary title. Absolutely nothing huge or flashy enough to have the cynical public aggressively screaming, maybe just a simple barony. Something small enough to quietly slip past absolutely without causing a massive media storm, but completely big enough entirely to finally do the absolute one thing Camilla had apparently been quietly, relentlessly working toward for long years. It would finally, legally force the Parker Bowles name completely into the official, permanent royal record for good. But exactly here is exactly where things turned absolutely, brutally cold. One specific year, entirely during the royal family's highly visible traditional Christmas walk to church, Camilla confidently made her absolute boldest move yet. She quietly arranged exactly for Freddie Parker Bowles to stand directly, immediately behind Prince George and the absolute rest of the next generation, exactly right where absolutely every single press camera would perfectly catch him proudly standing shoulder to shoulder, completely with the absolute future entirely of the monarchy. And really, that was absolutely all she desperately needed. Exactly one perfect photograph exactly like that, prominently printed absolutely everywhere, and the massive, inclusive message would practically seamlessly write itself. But a highly observant senior courtier sharply spotted exactly what was actively happening, completely before a single camera shutter clicked. Freddie Parker Bowles was absolutely immediately, physically pulled completely out of the highly visible line and aggressively shoved absolutely all the way entirely to the very back, standing exactly next to minor household staff, just mere seconds entirely before the massive bank of photographers actively started shooting. And the absolute wildest part of the entire scene? Camilla quietly watched absolutely every single agonizing second of that profound humiliation completely from across the cold courtyard. Her absolute own grandson had been deliberately positioned exactly beside the absolute future entirely of the monarchy, then physically, brutally removed and aggressively pushed entirely to the back, exactly like someone highly placed had suddenly remembered he absolutely didn't belong exactly there. And she absolutely couldn't do a single thing about it. Exactly what was she realistically supposed to do directly in the absolute middle entirely of a highly publicized royal Christmas gathering? 'Cause a massive, screaming scene loudly demand they put him directly back? So, she agonizingly said absolutely nothing. She just stood exactly there and quietly watched it happen entirely in front of absolutely everyone. According to the highly placed aide who explicitly witnessed it, this was absolutely entirely about belonging. Camilla intimately knew exactly what petty people absolutely still called her entirely behind closed doors. She deeply knew that absolutely no matter exactly how many long decades she stubbornly survived completely inside that massive family, some hostile people would absolutely always see her exactly as the invading, outsider queen who had somehow miraculously got through the heavy palace gates. Actively pulling her absolute own bloodline completely into the massive monarchy's future was her absolute final chance to permanently, definitively rewrite that toxic story. Once her actual family was permanently inside too, absolutely nobody could ever treat her exactly like some temporary, unwelcome outsider, absolutely ever again. But that specific, brutal Christmas morning aggressively exposed something massive Camilla absolutely still wasn't completely ready to admit. The massive palace apparatus had completely, already made its final, unyielding decision entirely about her family. Absolutely nobody had actually bothered entirely to politely sit her down and explicitly say it directly to her face yet. They absolutely didn't need to. Coldly watching Freddie Parker Bowles get brutally pulled entirely out of that highly visible line said exactly plenty. And Camilla was absolutely about to quickly find out exactly how incredibly far the highly powerful people entirely around her absolute own husband were entirely willing exactly to go completely to make absolutely sure her bloodline entirely stayed out for good. And exactly those specific, highly powerful people had a name: Prince William and Catherine. And to deeply, truly understand exactly why these two specific royals held the rigid line so incredibly hard, you absolutely have to deeply understand their entire overarching philosophy, entirely about exactly where this massive monarchy was completely going next. To the observing public, Prince William and Catherine flawlessly looked exactly like the ideal modern royal couple, incredibly warm, highly relatable, incredibly easy to like. But entirely behind thick palace doors, people incredibly close entirely to them clearly said their absolute real, long-term plan was significantly more calculated, rigid, and ruthless than absolutely anyone ever realized. From the exact moment Prince William fully stepped completely into a highly senior royal role, he aggressively followed exactly one ironclad rule, and he absolutely never, ever broke it: protect the pure bloodline. And honestly, this absolutely wasn't just about petty pride or some archaic, outdated royal arrogance. He desperately wanted exactly to kill the massive public confusion entirely before it even officially started. Exactly who actually, legally counted as royal, and exactly who absolutely didn't. A highly placed insider brutally put it plainly. Prince William deeply, fundamentally understood something incredibly basic about survival. The massive monarchy absolutely only survives entirely if the cynical public clearly sees the direct line exactly as perfectly clean and perfectly direct. Blood absolutely matters. And entirely if blood actually matters, then the massive official titles absolutely have to strictly prove it. And that was precisely exactly where the intense, quiet war completely with Camilla truly began. Camilla desperately wanted a highly messy, blended family tree, exactly one where her non-royal Parker Bowles grandchildren and her entirely civilian children eventually got comfortably, permanently folded completely into the official royal picture. Prince William and Catherine explicitly wanted the absolute, complete opposite. Absolutely only direct, pure Windsor blood officially gets a massive title. Prince William, exactly as the future, reigning king, fiercely wanted a significantly leaner monarchy, vastly fewer actual working royals, significantly clearer roles, and absolutely zero massive honors casually handed out simply because absolutely someone simply happened to legally marry completely into the family. So, exactly when Camilla started quietly floating minor title ideas entirely for her non-royal grandchildren, exactly here is exactly where it got almost painfully embarrassing. Prince William absolutely didn't even bother to argue completely with her. He simply went completely, utterly silent. And that specific deafening silence absolutely wasn't polite hesitation. It absolutely wasn't mere caution. It was highly calculated, entirely strategic, and he had an incredibly very good historical reason entirely for it. Years earlier, Camilla had actually already successfully won a significantly smaller, quiet victory. She smoothly managed exactly to get Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lope's significantly greater, highly visible prominence exactly at a massive state event. And exactly what did she allegedly do the absolute second she actually got that small win? She reportedly immediately leaked the highly specific details entirely to a highly friendly royal reporter entirely within weeks, aggressively spinning the whole massive thing publicly, exactly as absolute proof that the entire family was finally, completely embracing her children. The massive palace PR machine was completely blindsided. They actually had exactly to frantically scramble completely out an urgent emergency statement simply just to awkwardly walk the whole massive thing aggressively back. Prince William absolutely never, ever forgot that massive, embarrassing mess. To his highly strategic mind, it definitively proved exactly what would inevitably happen entirely if he ever gave Camilla absolutely even one single inch completely on Freddie Parker Bowles. It absolutely wouldn't stay quietly private, please. It would be aggressively, triumphantly splashed completely across the Sunday papers entirely within a month, heavily dressed up exactly as massive progress, and then ruthlessly dragged completely back out exactly as powerful ammunition entirely for her absolute next, larger demand. So, exactly this time, his firm answer absolutely wasn't even a polite firm no, it was absolute total silence. Because absolutely even formally responding entirely to her would have incredibly handed her exactly something tangible to desperately grab onto. And Catherine absolutely wasn't just simply sitting somewhere quietly, merely feeling uncomfortable entirely about absolutely all of this either. No, she aggressively got involved, completely directly. Exactly when the massive palace was formally choosing specific photos entirely for the highly publicized annual Christmas card, Catherine highly personally stepped completely in and explicitly, formally asked exactly for Freddie Parker Bowles entirely to be completely cropped, completely out, entirely of the absolute final picture. Absolutely not, because entirely of exactly who he was exactly as a person, but specifically because his highly visible face happily sitting exactly next entirely to Prince George, Charlotte, and Louis would have incredibly quietly, dangerously suggested a highly official status he simply absolutely did not actually have. She reportedly firmly told an aide she absolutely wasn't entirely about exactly to let exactly one single, casual photograph completely undo long years entirely of incredibly careful work, definitively deciding exactly who formally counted exactly as a real, working royal. Then finally came the absolute brutal moment Camilla truly deeply understood just exactly how incredibly far she'd completely fallen in influence. Right entirely after Charles's massive coronation, she explicitly requested a highly private, one-on-one meeting completely with Prince William. Think deeply about that for a second. This was absolutely something she absolutely never, ever even had exactly to ask for completely with Charles, because Charles absolutely always willingly came, actively looking entirely for her first. But Prince William's highly efficient office deliberately scheduled her meeting exactly 3 entire weeks out, and then, exactly as if that absolutely wasn't humiliating enough entirely, they incredibly quietly simply folded it completely into a massive group briefing, completely packed entirely with other, highly senior staff members instead. She absolutely never, ever actually got her highly requested private audience. Absolutely not once. And that was the exact, devastating moment it finally hit her. Absolutely whatever highly special, direct access she previously used exactly to have was completely, already permanently gone. So, entirely for years, Camilla stubbornly kept aggressively pushing, and entirely for years, she stubbornly kept aggressively getting absolute resistance, until eventually, she absolutely wasn't even exactly getting that anymore. She was simply getting absolutely nothing. A highly placed former aide clearly said Prince William absolutely never ever actually needed exactly to argue his absolute case entirely out loud. He simply calmly let the absolute, deafening stillness definitively answer completely for him. Catherine certainly had her own absolute reason entirely to stay incredibly firm too, and again, it absolutely wasn't petty, personal dislike. It was entirely about massive public optics. Entirely in a modern world exactly where absolutely every single tiny royal move gets brutally ripped apart online, casually handing highly formal honors directly to step-grandchildren would have loudly, terribly screamed blatant favoritism. And blatant favoritism is precisely the exact kind of massive public relations disaster the fragile palace absolutely did not deeply need. So, exactly when Prince George was finally, highly publicly handed the specific, massive ceremonial title explicitly reserved absolutely only for future kings, the exact specific title Camilla had spent long years deeply hoping would somehow magically go exactly to Freddie Parker Bowles instead, this absolutely wasn't just some boring routine announcement. Oh no, this was the absolute definitive answer. Incredibly loud, massively public, and absolutely impossible completely to ever twist. It loudly told absolutely everyone exactly who the massive monarchy's entire future completely belonged exactly to, the Windsors. Absolutely not the Parker Bowles line. Highly placed staff clearly said Prince William intimately knew precisely exactly how Camilla would emotionally react exactly when she finally heard the devastating news, and he deliberately made absolutely zero effort whatsoever exactly to soften that massive blow. None. He firmly believed it was significantly better exactly to be brutally, coldly direct entirely now than completely keep cruelly stringing her entirely along, completely with false hope entirely for absolutely another year. A trusted source, incredibly close, entirely to the family, perfectly said it absolutely best. Prince William absolutely wasn't being cruel. He simply absolutely wasn't being sentimental, especially exactly when it firmly came exactly to fiercely protecting the heavy crown. So, exactly while the entire world completely outside happily celebrated Prince George proudly stepping directly into his massive new role, Camilla reportedly sat completely inside the massive royal residence, entirely in devastated tears. And this absolutely wasn't entirely only about Prince George finally getting the massive title. That was absolutely the specific part that really, truly, deeply hurt. It was entirely about her absolute own beloved grandson explicitly being coldly told, completely without absolutely anyone actually having exactly to say a single word exactly to his face, that he absolutely never, ever stood a single chance. Prince William had decisively made his absolute position painfully, undeniably clear. Pure blood absolutely over any blended family. Strict legacy absolutely over messy sentiment. And the massive monarchy's highly protected future was absolutely never, ever going exactly to be informally shared. And directly, squarely in the absolute middle entirely of this entire massive mess, awkwardly stood King Charles, completely trapped entirely between the specific woman he deeply loved and the absolute son who would exactly one day entirely take his massive place. Highly publicly, Charles constantly gets politely painted exactly as the calm, steady one, the incredibly steady hand, the wise man holding absolutely everything perfectly together completely after long years entirely of messy royal chaos. But highly privately, he was absolutely about exactly to make a massive choice that brutally exposed something significantly far darker. A massive choice that definitively proved Charles absolutely might wear the heavy crown right now, but Prince William definitively, completely controls the massive future. And apparently, that exact, highly protected future absolutely has zero room whatsoever entirely in it completely for the Parker Bowles family. Here's the incredibly complex thing, though. Entirely for years, Camilla had heavily leaned entirely on Charles, exactly to actively help quietly push her non-royal family forward. She absolutely never ever stormed angrily into a room, loudly demanding absolutely anything outright. No, she incredibly softly expressed her deep wishes quietly, hopes really, maybe a small title entirely for Freddie Parker Bowles exactly one day, some kind entirely of highly formal, public recognition that her own grandchildren actually, finally belong incredibly close exactly to this family. And Charles, absolutely ever the polite diplomat, absolutely always had the perfect, soothing little answer waiting. "We'll quietly find exactly the right moment," he smoothly told her. That significantly more than exactly once. Well, then the actual massive moment finally arrived. The absolute, real, unshakable decision entirely on exactly whether that massive ceremonial title would absolutely finally go exactly to Freddie Parker Bowles. And suddenly, Charles was uncomfortably standing exactly at a brutal, massive crossroads. Give Freddie Parker Bowles the massive title and absolutely risk an all-out, destructive PR war completely with Prince William? Or simply hand it entirely to his own direct heir and completely, utterly shatter his waiting wife? Entirely in the absolute end, Charles inevitably chose the heavy crown. Because honestly, exactly when it absolutely, really, truly comes entirely down exactly to it, he absolutely always does. Highly placed sources clearly say he actually hesitated first, though. He absolutely didn't just instantly roll completely over immediately. Charles reportedly eagerly proposed a very real, thoughtful compromise. And this absolutely wasn't just some vague, tiny little gesture explicitly designed exactly to make Camilla simply shut up either. He heavily suggested quietly reviving an incredibly old, deeply dormant honorific. Exactly one last used many generations ago entirely for a highly distant relative who was absolutely never, ever even in the direct line entirely for the throne. Absolutely no massive land legally attached entirely to it, absolutely no state income, absolutely no legal claim entirely to the succession, absolutely nothing dangerous. Freddie Parker Bowles would simply harmlessly get exactly to carry a highly royal-sounding style exactly at official state events, entirely without actually touching the highly restricted actual peerage system entirely at all. Charles practically, flawlessly built the entire harmless thing exactly so Prince William could easily say yes completely, without actually surrendering a single, tangible thing that actually mattered. Prince William flatly said absolutely no, anyway. He coldly saw it exactly as something that could incredibly quietly, permanently poison the pure image entirely of the royal bloodline, entirely for generations, exactly if he ever allowed it entirely through absolutely even once. And Charles, a tired man who had completely spent his entire long reign exhaustively fighting entirely to keep this fragile modern monarchy completely stable, finally, totally caved. Here's the exact, devastating moment it actually, finally happened. Charles quietly called entirely in his top private secretary and firmly told him exactly to draft the official announcement, formally naming Prince George exactly as the specific one finally receiving the massive ceremonial title, the exact same title Camilla had exhaustingly spent long years, desperately hoping would somehow magically go exactly to Freddie Parker Bowles. Then, completely, utterly unprompted, he firmly added exactly one more devastating instruction. Make absolutely sure Freddie Parker Bowles' specific name, or absolutely any mention entirely of an alternative title, absolutely never, ever appears absolutely anywhere entirely in the official briefing materials.